Donald Trump tried to sound like a conqueror, but in the space of a few statements, the whole performance cracked open. First came the triumph. Iran, he suggested, had been beaten, decimated, finished. Then came the ask. Countries that rely on the Strait of Hormuz, he said, should take care of the passage with the United States helping a lot. That is not the language of total control. That is the language of a power center discovering in real time that chest-pounding is not the same thing as strategy. And the Strait of Hormuz is not some abstract strip of water on a map. It is an artery in the global machine. Oil, shipping, insurance, inflation, supply chains, airline costs, your gas bill, your grocery bill. If that artery tightens, the pressure moves everywhere. So when the White House message swings from "we already won" to "everybody please help," that is not just a messaging problem. That is a credibility problem. And credibility is the hidden currency of global power. Then the second layer hit. Claims that partners were joining pushback that suggested some of those partners were not nearly as eager as Trump implied. At the same time, an escalating war against media coverage that refused to read from the same script. So now this story is bigger than Trump, bigger than Iran, bigger than one shipping lane. This is about whether the architecture around American power is being reinforced or quietly bypassed. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what just happened, why Trump never saw it coming, and why the world you are living in today already looks different from the one you woke up in just days ago. If you had a business partner who insulted your customers, threatened your suppliers, picked a fight in a loading dock, and then called you asking for emergency backup, how long before you stopped taking that call seriously? Hold that thought, because that is exactly the question US allies and regional partners are now asking. Drop your answer in the comments. If a leader keeps treating allies like disposable tools, at what point do those allies start building around him instead of with him? Let us rewind the clock. This did not start with the Strait of Hormuz. It started with a pattern. Months and months of attacking allies, tariffing partners, treating NATO like a protection racket, publicly belittling countries whose cooperation Washington still depends on, and acting as if loyalty can be extracted on demand after trust has already been burned to the ground. Trump kept assuming the old machine would keep working simply because America is big enough to force it to work. That was the miscalculation. Because while Trump was performing outrage, other capitals were studying exposure. While he was treating diplomacy like a television segment, other governments were thinking in terms of redundancy, legal room, defensive posture, insurance, energy security, and Plan B. Europe has been learning to hedge. Gulf states have been learning to hedge. Even media ecosystems have been learning to hedge. When a superpower behaves like a volatile contractor instead of a stable anchor, everyone downstream starts sketching alternative blueprints. So, when the Strait of Hormuz suddenly moved to the center of the story, Trump seemed to expect the old reflex. America calls, others line up. But power is not just about who has the biggest navy. It is also about who still has the deepest reservoir of trust. And on that front, Trump has been draining the tank himself. Now, let me walk you through the 3 receipts, because this is where the structure of the story becomes impossible to miss. Receipt number 1 is Trump's own message whiplash. Earlier, Trump suggested that many countries, especially those affected by any attempted closure of the strait, would be sending warships in conjunction with the United States to keep it open and safe. Later, his tone shifted. Countries that receive oil through the strait, he said, should take care of the passage, and the United States would help a lot. Read those 2 ideas together, and the contradiction is glaring. The official framing sounds like coalition language. Burden sharing, partnership, global cooperation. Fine. But the plain English version is much harsher. He bragged first and outsourced second. He projected total dominance, then revealed dependence. He wanted the headline of victory without the burden of owning the aftermath. And that matters, because in geopolitics, sequencing is everything. If you truly have the situation under control, you do not need to pivot from, "we have already destroyed their capability," to "everyone else now needs to step up." That is not a smooth handoff. That is a public slip. It tells adversaries there may be more fragility in the system than the rhetoric admits. It tells allies the planning may have been thinner than advertised. and it tells markets that risk is rising faster than the slogans can contain it. Trump's defenders will say that he was simply calling for fair burden sharing. But burden sharing works when the burden was discussed before the crisis, not when the crisis is already live and your partners have spent months being insulted by the same person now asking for help. He declared victory before he secured the exit. That silence from the supposed coalition was deafening. Receipt number 2 is the response from allies and regional players. One of the most revealing moments came when claims started circulating that foreign partners, including France, would join a more assertive naval effort around the strait. A French rapid response account pushed back, saying there was no such shift and that the carrier group posture remained defensive in the eastern Mediterranean. In plain English, that was a no. Not our mission, not on your terms, not after your improvisation. And look at how unusual that is. Allies do not normally rush to publicly cool expectations unless they want distance on the record. Official language about posture, stability, and defense sounds technical. But what it really signals is caution. It signals reluctance to be pulled into a mission whose objectives, legal basis, and end state are all unclear. This connects to a broader pattern. Trump has repeatedly treated Allied support as something he can insult one day and requisition the next. The same instinct showed up when he brushed aside the idea of late-joining support from close partners in other moments, as though alliance management were a personal loyalty test rather than a long-term strategic asset. But countries remember, governments remember, militaries remember. They remember the tariffs, they remember the threats, they remember the swagger. So when the call comes in during a live crisis, they answer with hedging, not enthusiasm. And the Gulf is watching too. Regional states may still work with Washington. They may still rely on Washington in major ways. But dependence is not the same thing as trust, and trust is not the same thing as obedience. If you are in Doha, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, or Kuwait, you are asking a brutal question right now. Is the United States still the security guarantor, or is it becoming a destabilizing variable you need insurance against? Trump was demanding loyalty from capitals he already taught not to trust him. Receipt number 3 is the media pressure campaign. As the narrative got messier, Trump turned on the coverage. He attacked major outlets, complained that headlines were misleading, and elevated the idea that the media itself was the problem, rather than the contradictions in his own messaging. Also amplified celebratory material portraying legacy media as weakened, reshaped, or brought to heel. Notice what that reveals. This is not confidence. This is control instinct. Then came the regulatory echo around him. Trump allies, including FCC Chair Brendan Carr, have used rhetoric about broadcasters, public interest obligations, distortions, and license renewals in ways that many critics read as an attempt to intimidate coverage. The official language is always dressed up in civics, trust, accuracy, public interest. But the plain language is harder to ignore. Tell the story our way, or understand that power can be brought very close to your door. That is a huge tell. Because when an administration is truly secure, it does not need to threaten the camera. It does not need to frame independent scrutiny as sabotage. It does not need to celebrate a media ecosystem that has been hollowed out and made more compliant. And here is the part Trump world keeps missing. Audiences do not disappear when old outlets are weakened. They migrate. They move to independent media. They look for people connecting the dots honestly. That is the blind spot in the whole strongman theory of information. You can pressure institutions. You cannot erase curiosity. When the battlefield narrative slips, the next target becomes the messenger. If this story is connecting dots you have not seen assembled anywhere else, you are already ahead of most people watching this unfold. Hit subscribe right now. This is moving faster than any single outlet can track, and you need to be here when the next piece drops. Here at the Midas Touch Network, we are going to keep covering it honestly. Now step back and look at the contrast, because this is where the real strategic lesson lives. Most leaders, when attacked or embarrassed, get louder. They perform anger. They tweet harder. They issue bigger threats. The smarter players in this story did something else. They built distance. They used institutions. They used ambiguity. They used defensive posture, legal language, and quiet hedging. They did not charge into Trump's improvisation. They reduced their exposure to it. That is the strategist move. And in this case, the strategist is not one sainted leader. It is a whole category of actors learning the same lesson at once. European governments keeping military moves limited. Gulf states exploring de-escalation and self-protection. Companies studying shipping risk. Insurers recalculating exposure. Independent media building outside the old gatekeepers. Not with missiles, not with slogans, with networks, with standards, with redundancy. Trump, by contrast, still approaches power like a blunt object. He thinks force is enough. He thinks volume is enough. He thinks if he humiliates enough people publicly, they will still come running when he needs them privately. But the modern world does not work like that. While Trump obsesses over domination, others are building bypasses. They are opening side channels. They are keeping options open. They are treating Washington as one node in a larger system, not the unquestioned center of gravity. This is the same operating system that has defined Trump for years. Overpromise, underprepare, externalize the cost, demand loyalty after the damage. That may work in a branding exercise. It does not work in a live geopolitical choke point. You do not beat chaos by joining it. You build a bypass around it. So what does this actually mean for you? It means if you live anywhere touched by energy prices, you are in this story whether you want to be or not. Shipping disruptions raise insurance premiums. Insurance premiums feed into freight costs. Freight costs move through retail, manufacturing, agriculture, aviation, and household budgets. If you work in logistics, finance, energy, or trade, the Strait of Hormuz is not a headline to you. It is a risk variable that can hit payroll, pricing, and planning. It also means the structure of business decisions may be changing in ways that outlast any single crisis. Once a company reroutes supply, diversifies sourcing, changes insurers, or shifts strategic relationships because a political partner looks unstable, it usually does not snap right back just because the news cycle cools. The contracts follow the new routes. The investment follows the new routes. The jobs often follow the new routes too, and they do not automatically come back. Now let me give you the 3 scenarios from here. Scenario 1 is a managed reset. Back channels open. A face-saving arrangement emerges. Tensions cool just enough for shipping to stabilize, and for everyone to claim they defended peace. Trump says he forced burden sharing. Allies say they preserve stability. Markets exhale. But even in this best case, the structural changes remain. Partners have now seen the fragility. They do not forget that scenario 2 is the domino realignment. This is where middle powers keep learning from each other. Hedge more, diversify more, build regional security arrangements, strengthen alternative networks in energy, finance, diplomacy, and media. The United States remains enormous, still central, still militarily unmatched in many respects. But it is no longer the unquestioned axis around which every other player automatically turns. The old center stays big, it just stops being absolute. Scenario 3 is the spiral. This is the scenario nobody wants to name out loud. Trump hits back harder. More threats, more pressure on allies, more pressure on media, more improvisation around security, more market fear, more forced choices for governments that do not want to choose. This is how fragmentation deepens, not all at once, through a series of shocks that teach every actor in the system to trust the old architecture a little less each time. And that is the final frame here. Whatever happens next, this relationship between Trump's version of American power and the rest of the network will never be exactly the same again. Even if this specific crisis cools tomorrow, the lesson has already been learned. You never put all your strategic eggs in one basket. Once alternatives are built, they do not vanish. They become the new normal. Trump did not invent every pressure point in the Middle East, but he is very good at taking unstable systems and making them more volatile. The countries now hedging against Washington did not start this entire story, but they are getting very good at surviving it. So, here are the big questions. Did Trump expose weakness in America's partners, or did he expose the limits of his own method? Is this smart self-protection by allies and regional players, or the early stage of a much more dangerous fracture? And if the world is already building around Trump's unpredictability, what exactly is left of the old claim that only he projects strength? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe because the next chapter, whether it is naval posture, Gulf realignment, media intimidation, or the price shock that hits consumers next, is coming fast. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified experts before making decisions.